Hi, I'm Christina. I'm a graduate student in journalism and communication, and I'm going to reveal some media techniques journalists and communicators use and teach you some things you might not know about the industry. This is Media Tidbits. Sounds kind of like Timbits. Timbits? Whatever, I'm Canadian. Okay, so for today's video, I want to talk about some things I've seen on social media and YouTube regarding the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case. And I know you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, this has been done to death. Why do you need to do this? Well, because there's actually a lot to pick apart. I've seen a lot of analysis videos and I've read a lot of comments like on Twitter, on YouTube, like you name it. And as a media student, I was getting really frustrated because there are so many things that are wrong or bugging me in general, but what I've seen. So I'm here to set the record straight. Today, we're going to talk about language used in civil cases versus criminal cases, because an unbelievable amount of people, including some journalists, are getting this completely wrong. I also want to touch on who owns the rights to Amber's Dateline interview, because I've seen a lot of people ask this question. So we're going to look at media law to help determine the answer. And lastly, speaking of Dateline, I want to chat about the editing side of things. Okay, so a lot of people have been tweeting that Amber was guilty of defamation. But listen, guilty is not the right word. We use the word guilty in criminal trials. So like when we have the Crown or the state prosecuting someone, not when like another person is suing another person. That's not the same thing. So this is a civil case and we don't use criminal language in a civil case because it's not criminal. So, and defamation is not a criminal offense, as in you can't do jail time for defamation. You can wind up paying out large sums of money, as we well know, but you're not doing jail time. But so therefore, you can't do jail time, but you can, however, be found liable. And this is the magic word here. In a civil case, someone is found liable. So in this case, Amber Heard was found liable for defaming Johnny Depp, right? She's not guilty. No one is guilty because that's a word reserved for criminal cases. And then she also hasn't been convicted of a crime. Convicted is another word that we use in criminal cases. So that's not something we're using here. The jury found her liable. They didn't convict her of a crime, right? So just to reiterate, liable, not libel. Libel is a type of defamation, but liable is the word we need to be using here. Okay, so for this, I literally had to consult my notes from last semester. Basically, unless there's some kind of contract making Amber Heard the co-author of a work, NBC, who owns Dateline, owns the interview. So not even Samantha Guthrie would own it, but instead the organization or the company she performed the interview for, they would own it. So much like a film's rights, a film isn't, the rights to a film is not owned by an actor or owned by the actors in it. So like Titanic, for example, Leonardo DiCaprio does not own the rights to Titanic. So similar to that, the interview becomes the property of who authored the work, so not the person who was interviewed. So the person who authored the work is the person who put the interview together and turned it into a story. And in this case, that's NBC. Okay, so I heard someone on YouTube say they thought it was fishy that the Dateline interview is edited. And now either that same person or someone else, I really can't remember, everything kind of blends together, also said they wanted to see every pause Amber made and was disappointed that a lot of her pauses before answering questions were edited out. Well, my friends, interviews are edited for a number of reasons, least of all to push a narrative like I think this person might have been suggesting, and it's not to be fishy. So let's go through some of the most common reasons why interviews are edited. So you ever ask someone a question and then they go off on a tangent that has nothing to do with anything? Sometimes that's exactly what happens when we interview someone. So when you see or hear abrupt cuts, it just might be that the interviewee wasn't really adding anything else after the initial sentence where they kind of paused for a moment. It's an easy place to cut once they paused after a response. And then maybe everything else after that was like word salad or just didn't make sense or was completely off topic, right? And perhaps as well, that's one solution or one, sorry, well, I can't think. That's one possibility. But also sometimes it could be that they're speaking a mile a minute. So I'm speaking a mile a minute right now, and it's going to be really hard to cut my answer up if need be, right? Do you see how I went on for too long? If you tried to splice that because you liked a sentence in the middle, it's going to be really hard. It's going to sound really awkward. You have such an abrupt cut before and such an abrupt cut after. Sometimes you have to go where the person, it's like who you're interviewing, has a natural pause. They might have answered the question to some degree and there's a natural pause in there. And that's where you have to cut it. You know, sometimes who you're interviewing, there's like, they might say something that's an absolute gem of a sentence, but it's surrounded by, you know, it's surrounded, bookended, you know, squashed by run-on sentences and lack of breathing. So it sounds unnatural if we were to cut it that way. So again, we might just try cutting to the nearest point that makes sense and where there's a slight pause. Believe it or not, television programs run for a certain amount of time. This is not a YouTube video or a podcast. That's not what Dateline is. This is a YouTube video. So every single second counts. So I was working in a simulated newsroom last semester, and believe me when I say, if you're told you have 3 minutes and only 3 minutes for a story, then you best not go over that 3-minute mark because your story is not going to make it in, because then you're going to push back the broadcasting time. So like think about the 6 o'clock news, right? And don't think about 6 o'clock news when like there was an emergency and then it goes over the news hour, but your typical 6 o'clock news. That program cannot run overtime or it's going to run over scheduled programming, right? So remember, every second counts. And that's why some of the pauses might be cut out, because that's why some of the first things to get cut is dead air. Are you ever watching interviews like this one and wondering why the questions and answers are sometimes like really close to one another? Like it sounds like Amber didn't have time to think, or the interviewer didn't have time to think before asking the next question. Like there wasn't even time to breathe. That's because every second counts, especially if there are gaps and lulls that you couldn't cut because they're in the middle of the interviewee's sentence. So I know I often would cut things, like cut the gaps between before the person answered the question and after they've answered the question, things like that. It's my go-to, right? And this is why you don't get to see and hear every single time Amber takes long to ponder a question. But on that same breath, you might be wondering why any of Amber's long dramatic pauses were kept in. Well, first of all, it can't all be go, 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 go 1,000 miles a minute, right? The piece needs room to breathe. So the journalists or the editors or whoever's responsible for putting together the video, they're going to choose key moments to let that story breathe. This also might be done because whoever's putting the video together wants to show the audience something nuanced or important in the interviewee's expression, because facial expressions and what someone does before answering a question or whatnot can reveal a lot of information. So some of what we see might be strategically shown. The bottom line is, it's not fishy. Interviews need edits for all these reasons. And while there might be more reasons out there than the ones I just listed, these are some of the most common ones. And that's all for today's media tidbit. So if this taught you something today and you wish I had more videos, don't you worry. I've definitely got a couple of great ideas up my sleeve and I will get to them ASAP. For now though, if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, especially so you don't miss the next one. And I'll see you in the comments.